All right, my name is Ryan. I'm here from Kansas Forest Service. Yes, we do have some trees in Kansas. It's not all a treeless plain. In fact, I just checked on the tree last week. It's doing just fine. So that'll be the extent of. No, sorry, I couldn't help making the joke. You know, Great Plains Forestry. It's low-hanging fruit. There, got to poke some fun at myself. We do have some trees in Kansas, quite a few, in fact. This is a shot I particularly like of the Baldwin Woods, which is just south of Lawrence, and that's pretty typical for eastern third of Kansas woodlands. Lots of hills, farmed in between. But we do have some nice forest land in Kansas, which goes a little bit against what you'd expect. Some of our major concerns, obviously, emerald ash borer. That's why I'm here. We're still having a big trouble with pine wilt, especially as it continues to move west in Kansas. Bush honeysuckle is a major threat to our forest understory. We're having some big problems with that, absolutely annihilating our diversity of the forest understory in a lot of our native woodland areas in Kansas. We don't have thousand cankers disease yet, but we anticipate eventually we'll pick up a walnut twig beetle in a trap somewhere. We don't have Asian longhorn beetle or gypsy moth yet, but we're anticipating that down the road and trying to be prepared for that. First off, EAB. First detection in our area was just across the border there in Missouri, obviously in July 2012 in Parkville, Missouri, which is just on the northern edge of the Kansas City metro area there. Second one was picked up in August, just a little bit later, and that one actually was, of course, in Kansas. That was at the Wyandotte County Lake, which is a small recreation area on the northern side of Kansas City, Kansas. And I guess I should preface this too by saying I'm not a regulatory person. I'm from the Kansas Forest Service. The regulatory agency in Kansas is Kansas Department of Agriculture, so I can really only tell you, what I've learned from them in their trapping efforts. And in fact, I've only been on board with Kansas Forest Service since August of this year, so some of this is going to be secondhand from what I know before I was even on the job. I just figured I'd let you guys know about that. Our most recent one this year was at the Deffenbaugh landfill, which is a major landfill and place where a lot of tree waste gets taken in the Kansas City metro area. And that was just barely across the county line in Johnson County, Kansas, which got a lot of people concerned as Johnson County is kind of a well-to-do, a lot of wealth in that county, and large master gardener program there. So there's a lot of engaged plant-type people that really perked up on that. And we've got a lot of feedback, and it's really helped with our outreach, I think, at that point. We got a lot of public buy-in all of a sudden. So the monitoring that's been done by Kansas Department of Agriculture this last year in 2013, there were 65 traps that were placed by KDA as part of 268 that were statewide, funded by USDA. They're mostly in the eastern half of the state, as you can see, with a large concentration around the Kansas City and Topeka metro areas here. And it's my understanding on these that these were placed by that computerized algorithm that figures out, the strategic areas to place these at. But given they're not statewide, there was really no monitoring that's going on around Emporia and Ottawa here. But of all these traps that were placed out there, none of them came back positive, so we had no further detections in non-quarantine counties. We still just have Wyandotte and Johnson County here. The only detections that we did have were in those existing counties at Wyandotte County Lake here. This is a zoom-in inset of this small area in eastern Kansas, right in the Kansas City metro area. There were several, as part of a little trial to see if we can pick up a few more. We did some girdled trap trees. When I say we, really, it was a partnership mostly with Kansas Department of Agriculture, but we did have some of our staff go out and help peel these trees, and if anyone's peeled trees, it's fairly labor intensive, so all hands are always appreciated there. We did find several EAB in some of those girdled trees, and these purple markers here indicate, of course, the purple traps that did have EAB found in them. This one down here, just the county line runs right through the Kaw River here. So that one you can see is just barely a couple hundred yards inside the county line for Johnson County. So that tripped the quarantine for an additional county back in July of this year. So not a large number of insects we're picking up, and in a fairly small geographic area, at least when it comes to the political borders of Kansas at this point. And I may be speaking outside my range a little bit here, and I apologize to our friends from Missouri if I do this, but it's my understanding that some of the traps north of the Kansas City Metro Airport had much larger numbers of adult EAB found in them than some of our traps on the Kansas side. So we anticipate, especially north of the Kansas City Metro area, perhaps in Leavenworth County, we may find some more EAB in the next trapping season. Is that accurate to say that the traps up there by the airport were probably had decent numbers of adults? Yeah, I had heard somewhere in the range of 50 as opposed to 3 or 4.
That's right.
Okay. So I just got a couple quick slides of that trap tree that we had cut and peeled. So it was girdled, left standing all summer, felled in September, had a little bit of signage on it here for public education outreach. This was again at Wyandotte County Lake, which is a public use area on the north side of Kansas City. We peeled them, found quite a few galleries, pretty much where we'd expect on the upper half of the tree and the smaller diameter limbs. We did find quite a few EAB larvae in there. This was less of a regulatory type of monitoring situation with this location as it was just an opportunity to train lots of people to get more expertise with trapping and peeling and looking for these insects. Like was mentioned earlier, it's a lot more beneficial to really get some hands-on, pick up the little critters rather than just looking at pictures on bugwood over and over. So going forward, of course, our plan is to, at least with our own efforts and outreach, to really closely monitor the counties right within that area of first infestation. If nothing else, to really have some more outreach with our local partners, with arborists, master gardeners, extension agents, because we really view a lot of the public, the citizen pest detectors and arborists who may notice something as being a much more likely way to find a new infestation rather than simply relying on the purple sticky traps, which are it can be effective and can be not as well. I don't mean to editorialize too much. We're also looking at working with a lot of our partners. We got 2 very high use recreation areas, Perry State Lake and Clinton State Lake. Those are the 2 highest use state parks in the state of Kansas. They're right by Lawrence here, right off I-70 and some highways. So we're really ramping up our efforts to partner with the Corps of Engineers and the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks with these to try and monitor and see if we're getting any spread outside of that metro area. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, of course, as Colin mentioned, Missouri has gone from county level quarantines to a state level quarantine. And I don't mean to imply any sort of criticism of that decision. It is probably going to change the rate at which EAB spreads and potentially moves within Missouri. Hopefully the Don't Move Firewood campaign will work and people will limit the movement there. But that, of course, since we share a fairly large east-west border with the state of Missouri, could potentially impact any sort of new cross-border infestations into Kansas. So that'll be something we'll look at going forward. I honestly don't know if this is going to increase the potential for spread into Kansas at a sooner date than otherwise, but the reality is that the quarantine has changed, so we're going to find out if that spread rate has changed as well. We really don't know where we are in this curve. I'm sure everybody is very familiar with the death curve and the EAB curve. We figure some of those trees in the Kansas City metro area on the Kansas side, we look back on some of those rings and they're not particularly deep into the tree. So we're probably still ahead of the curve in a way here to try and do some at least preparation for finding higher uses for some of this wood that we know is going to be coming down and hitting the ground in 4 to 5 years. And that's part of one of our big pushes here to help create. Our working name for this right now is Utilization District for the Kansas City metro area. As we're seeing a lot of ash hit the ground, we're trying to take an example and lead from some of the states in the east that have been dealing with this for 10 years to see if we can have some sort of plan in place for utilizing this wood before we really get hit with it, before cities start to see a lot of removal become necessary. And I know that I'm personally not nearly smart enough to figure this out by myself. We're going to have to take from a lot of examples and a lot of partners on that. So with anybody who's had any experience dealing with this and trying to facilitate some sort of utilization to support removal or replanting, or just try and deter that wood from hitting just the chips or burn piles. I'd love to hear your experiences and what you've learned from that. So I've got my contact information at the end of this, or if you just want to catch me and we can exchange cards, I'd love to make contact with you and find out what we can implement that may be from your experiences. Thousand Cankers disease, of course, it's not in Kansas yet. It looms right out there on our western doorstep. We do have a big outreach effort. The main interstate that runs through Kansas, I-70, we got a big billboard right on the state line here that espouses the message, don't move firewood, watch out for Thousand Cankers. So I don't know if that billboard's going to keep people from moving logs on a trailer down the road. But we're doing our best to at least educate folks who are moving from Colorado into Kansas about the threat that lies there in wait in Colorado. We're trying to, in essence, hold our gap in the line for our friends in Missouri and all of our producers in the eastern third of Kansas. There is a fairly significant walnut production in the eastern third of Kansas, most of it tied in with processing in Missouri. But we're trying to hold that gap if we can through outreach, really, at this point, and monitoring. This is essentially verbatim the information I got from our friends at the Kansas Department of Agriculture, from Jeff Vogel. And I've got this on a map because this is a little hard to parse and understand. In essence, this breaks down the same issue that a couple of the folks have mentioned with the Farm Bill survey getting delayed, the 2012 surveying being done in 2013. So we had two phases of monitoring here, and you can see it's very concentrated along this this buffer zone, as it were, between all our walnut population and the state of Missouri. And there's 117 total walnut twig beetle traps that were put out. I believe they were all the funnel type Lindgren traps. I'm only about 95% on that. There may have been a few others of various makes and models, but I think they were all the funnel traps. And just in case anyone has real sharp eyes, that purple trap there doesn't mean it was a positive. That just means that was a trap that was put out by one other partner. Doesn't mean anything. They were all negative. None of those showed up any walnut twig beetles. So we're still in the clear as far as monitoring for that goes. I don't know what we're projected to have for next year as far as number of traps. I would guess that it would be somewhat fewer than 117, but that would be speculation on my part. I think we need to wait and find out what our funding situation is on that. In addition, there's a firewood survey that's done both for TCD and EAB compliance with the Department of Agriculture. The last email I got updating me on that, as of November 20th, they've checked 56 locations this year, which includes about 1,700 bundles and 20,000 pieces of firewood. As a result of that, they haven't found any insect material. They have found some regulated materials such as walnut and that, but they've entered into compliance agreements with all the firewood sellers and supermarkets and that. So staying on top of that in terms of firewood surveys in Kansas. I mentioned pine wilt. This continues to be a big threat to us because Kansas has the dubious distinction of being the only state in the contiguous 48 that has no native pines. I'm sure some of you guys from the southern pine belt here just can't even hardly believe that. But we have 0 native pines, so almost all of our pines are planted with a purpose, and a lot of those are windbreaks and farm shelter belts and that. And as it continues to move west, we're really seeing some issues with loss of species diversity in our windbreaks, and in addition to loss of a lot of community forest and urban pines. It started in the southeast corner of the state here in 1979. It's been a slow march west since then. This is about the line where we consider it generally the leading edge of presence of pine wilt, but we still have fairly healthy pines in the western third of the state. In the Kansas City metro area, all along the population base along I-70 here, we've got a large loss of pines due to the pine wilt nematode. There is a silver lining in that, though, as well. At the John C. Pear Center, which is a cooperation with Kansas State University, Dr. Jason Griffin, is anyone familiar with his pine wilt research? He's doing some really interesting things with beetle feeding preferences as far as species goes, challenging a little bit of the common knowledge on that. We've always kind of figured Scotch pine is the most preferred, but in some cases it happens to not be the first choice for the beetle. He's doing some resistant species trials, loblollies, southwestern whites, some hybrids between them, some provenance studies to find out if we can find something that is going to be perhaps more resistant. A lot of this is still very much in progress, so I don't have a whole lot of hard data and peer-reviewed articles that I can present to you, but some very encouraging stuff coming out of Wichita. Our biggest issue by far has been the overriding issue of drought, and this has made any sort of visual monitoring for emerald ash borer, for thousand cankers, for pine wilt, for any of our other real challenges really difficult because we have majorly stressed trees over the past few years. I just threw up some stuff from the National Drought Mitigation Center here just since January 1st of this year. Obviously the darker the color is, the worse we've got. So we started the year in really terrible, severe, exceptional drought. We got a little bit of relief by the end of July. October, the eastern half of the state was starting to look better, at least in the short term. And as we sit now, we're starting to really hurt from that again. We're seeing lots of long-term effects. Even though we did get some reasonable rain back in July through October, we're still having some long-term stressed trees, which are really, we're finding a lot of that reducing the resistance to a lot of other things that are out there. We're having a lot of trees that are susceptible to injury from disease at this point. So that's all I have right now. I tried to buzz through that to keep everyone awake. If you got any questions, like I said, feel free to grab me if you want to know anything more in depth, or shoot me an email. If you have any questions that I can answer right now, I'd be happy to take them though.